Thanks to Indochino for keeping Legaleagle in the air and helping me look fly. If you were taking bets on what President Trump would do after being acquitted of impeachment in the Senate, and you said meddle in the affairs of the Department of Justice in a way that would make Richard Nixon blush, well, you win. Yay! As you probably know, Attorney General Barr has begun overtly inserting himself into the DOJ cases that directly affect the president. That interference caused 4 prosecutors at the DOJ to withdraw from the case of Roger Stone, and 1 resigned from the DOJ entirely. This is not normal. It's Nixon's Saturday Night Massacre if AG Richardson and Deputy AG Ruckelshaus hadn't resigned in protest. Hey Legal Eagles, it's time to think like a lawyer, because with every passing day there are fewer and fewer good lawyers at the Department of Justice. On this episode of What the Crap is Going On with the Justice Department, we're going to take a look at the current debacle involving the DOJ, President Trump, AG Barr, and Judge Amy Berman Jackson as it pertains to the sentencing of former Trump campaign advisor Roger Stone Jr., because the rule of law is at stake here. It's hard to overestimate just how crazy this whole situation is. So how did we get here? Well, last November, the self-proclaimed Machiavellian, Richard Nixon-loving Roger Stone Jr. was convicted in federal court on 7 counts, including 1 count of obstruction of proceeding, 5 counts of making false statements, and 1 count of witness tampering. Seriously, someone needs to explain to me how this guy is not starring in the next Batman movie as the supervillain Penguin. He's definitely got the look. On Monday, February 10th, prosecutors from the Department of Justice submitted their recommendation for Roger Stone's sentencing after he had already been convicted of 7 different felonies. Now, often prosecutors will offer a more lenient sentence in exchange for a plea bargain and not having to go through the trouble of actually going through the trial. Roger Stone wanted to roll the dice and went through the entire trial, which resulted in his convictions. As a result, the Department of Justice requested a sentence within the federal sentencing guidelines of between 7 and 9 years. But what happened next can only be described as bananas, because apparently upon seeing the recommended sentence by the DOJ, the president violated a norm that says that a president should not comment on ongoing criminal prosecutions and fired off the tweet stating, "This is a horrible and very unfair situation. The real crimes were on the other side, as nothing happens to them. Cannot allow this miscarriage of justice." In less than 24 hours after the initial sentencing recommendation and the subsequent Trump tweet, the 4 line prosecutors at the DOJ who were handling the Stone case withdrew from the case, and 1 actually resigned from the Department of Justice, while new prosecutors handling this case at the DOJ claimed that they made a decision prior to the Trump tweet. They submitted a supplemental amended sentencing memorandum recommending a lighter sentence. In doing so, they stated that the initial sentencing recommendation filed the day before, quote, does not accurately reflect the Department of Justice's position on what would be a reasonable sentence in this matter. And I don't know if I can adequately convey to you how crazy this is or what it must feel like to be one of those DOJ prosecutors. Imagine yourself a respected Department of Justice lawyer who just made a sentencing recommendation to a federal judge. You're looking good in your Indochino suit. You spent at least a year on this case, you took it to trial, and you won, and the sentencing recommendation was vetted by your boss and your boss's boss, and it was within the federal guidelines. Yet just hours after you file your recommendation with the court, the big boss, the political boss, comes in and says your months of work on the case don't matter at all, and your recommendation is wrong. And the president even weighs in on how bad your original work product is. You can imagine that these prosecutors are pissed. And initially, people were wondering if this was a political hatchet job and if Bill Barr or the president was responsible for it. And then the president tweeted to confirm that it was both political and that Bill Barr was responsible for it. The tweets from the president kept coming, applauding Attorney General Bill Barr and condemning Judge Amy Berman Jackson and the foreperson for the Stone trial. All of this with the actual sentencing date imminently approaching. And Trump's constant tweets about the matter undercut the Department of Justice's position that it made the decision to reverse itself on the sentencing recommendation without any intervention from President Trump. So why is this such a big deal? Well, the Department of Justice and the FBI are law enforcement agencies that theoretically operate outside of the political influence from the White House. Now, of course, the president appoints the Attorney General and often the U.S. attorneys, but in the American system of government, the president is not empowered to use the FBI and DOJ for political purposes, or to save his cronies from punishment. The controversy over the Stone sentencing is the latest in a series of events that is potentially eroding the independence independence of the Department of Justice and coloring their actions with a political pen. So before we get into the sentencing fiasco, here's a quick primer on Roger Stone and the charges and conviction that led to the current implosion going on at the DOJ right now. Now, Roger Stone, as you may know, is a Republican advisor that has been around since the campaign days of Richard Nixon. He's played roles in several campaigns, some successful, a la Ronald Reagan, and some not so much, like Bob Dole. Stone is, to put it mildly, a character. Stone once told The New Yorker, "It's rare that I'm accused of something that I'm not guilty of." The self-described dirty trickster was most recently a former advisor to President Trump. Last year, Stone was arrested on charges of obstruction of justice, giving false statements and witness tampering that all stemmed from findings of special counsel Robert Mueller's probe into the Russian election interference. Specifically, these charges related to his efforts to provide the Trump campaign with inside information from WikiLeaks about hacked emails and his subsequent lying about it to the House Intelligence Committee. During Stone's trial, the DOJ showed that the Trump campaign was told in April of 2016 that WikiLeaks had the ability to hack email accounts of Hillary Clinton, her campaign chair John Podesta, the DOC, and other government email accounts. And it was subsequently confirmed that Stone was interacting and negotiating with WikiLeaks head honcho Julian Assange. Stone spoke with senior Trump campaign officials about WikiLeaks and, quote, information it might have had that would be damaging to the Clinton campaign. And senior campaign officials later asked Stone about any future releases from WikiLeaks. Various statements by Stone, including many public ones, raised questions about whether he had some sort of inside knowledge about WikiLeaks or its plans. He denied having any such knowledge and claimed that anything that he did know about WikiLeaks came through an intermediary, radio host Randy Credico, although it was ultimately proven that the information was coming from conservative author and conspiracy theorist Jerome Corsi. Ultimately, the charges and conviction focused on Stone's alleged lies to the House Intelligence Committee during 2017 about his efforts to get in touch with WikiLeaks during the campaign. In addition, Stone was convicted of trying to tamper and intimidate a witness, Credico, to ensure that he would either stick to a false narrative or plead the fifth. In fact, at one point, Stone suggested that those testifying regarding the WikiLeaks information should pull a Frank Pentangeli to prevent contradicting Stone's earlier testimony, which relates to The Godfather, because of course it does.
I never knew no Godfather.
And Stone was no mere coffee boy. During Stone's trial, the government admitted for the first time that Stone may have discussed WikiLeaks with Donald Trump during the summer of 2016. In fact, Rick Gates testified that he was in a limousine with Trump on their way to LaGuardia Airport when Trump talked on the phone with Stone about the hacked emails. This information was apparently redacted from the Mueller report and was not made public until the Stone trial. It directly contradicts Trump's statement to Robert Mueller that, quote, I did not recall discussing WikiLeaks with Stone, nor do I recall being aware of Mr. Stone having discussed WikiLeaks with individuals associated with my campaign. So we can assume that Stone has a lot of information about President Trump that the president may not want to become public, leading some to speculate that regardless of what sentence is handed down to Stone, he will avoid substantial jail time specifically because he knows so much damaging information about President Trump, likely through a presidential pardon. So, Roger Stone was convicted of all charges on November 15th, 2019, leading to the crucial sentencing phase that we're in right now. As with other cases, prior to the pending sentencing hearing, the prosecutors for the DOJ prepared a memorandum giving their sentencing recommendation to the judge. Government prosecutors based their sentencing recommendations on the United States sentencing guidelines for the offenses of conviction. In the recommendation, the prosecutors explained the reasoning for the government's sentencing suggestion. Prosecutors took a hard line on Stone because in addition to lying under oath, obstructing Congress's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election, and witness tampering, Stone showed a total contempt for the court and the legal system. The original sentencing memorandum states, but when his crimes were revealed by the indictment in his case, he displayed contempt for this court and the rule of law. For that, he should be punished in accord with the advisory guidelines. The memorandum highlights the facts that were fleshed out in Stone's trial, including that Trump's campaign team believed that Stone was providing them with non-public information about WikiLeaks plans. And with reference to the testimony before the House Intelligence Committee, the memorandum states that Stone told the committee 5 categories of lies. Those lies were designed to conceal Stone's communications with Corsi, Credico, and the Trump campaign about WikiLeaks in 2016. And a crucial factor for the sentencing recommendation, and perhaps the straw that broke the DOJ's back, was that the crimes committed by Stone involved violence or the threat of violence. The sentencing memorandum highlights a few key instances where this was evident. For instance, on April 9th, 2018, in an email chain about Stone's testimony, Stone wrote to his alleged intermediary, Credico, quote, I'm going to take that dog away from you, not a thing you can do about it either, because you are a weak, broke piece of shit. Stone also told Credico to, quote, prepare to die.
Prepare to die.
Although Credico stated he didn't believe that Stone would steal his dog or hurt him directly, he did state that he was worried about other people getting ideas if Stone posted the message directly, which is the idea behind stochastic terrorism. Now, all of these facts resulted in a guideline recommended sentence of 7 to 9 years, and it's true that prosecutors have discretion for proposed sentences, but government prosecutors don't make arbitrary sentencing recommendations. They're required to use the federal sentencing guidelines, which themselves were a response to wildly different sentences being handed down by federal judges, often based on race rather than criminal severity. So the federal sentencing guidelines are a non-binding set of rules that set out a uniform sentencing policy for defendants convicted in the federal court system. Judges can disregard those sentencing guidelines, but often they're seen as prima facie reasonable. A defendant's sentence is determined by many different factors, ranging from his subjective guilt to how harmful his actions were to the actors involved. And without getting too bogged down in the details, when you're using the sentencing guidelines, you first create a base level, which is predetermined based on the actual convictions. Then that level can either be increased or decreased due to specific offense characteristics. Here, the original DOJ sentencing memorandum increased Stone's base level based in part on the threats of violence that were issued. The memorandum stated that pursuant to the sentencing guidelines, 8 levels should be added because the offense, quote, involved causing or threatening to cause physical injury to a person or property damage in order to obstruct the administration of justice. In supporting their position, the memorandum noted the standard applied in previous federal cases. For example, in U.S. versus Plumlee, the court held that, quote, to apply the enhancement, there is no additional seriousness requirement beyond the fact of a violent threat. And thus, with the crimes that Stone was convicted of and the threat of violence used in the commission of those crimes, the Justice Department came to a recommendation of 7 to 9 years. And although the president and his advocates think that the sentencing recommendation is excessive, it's in line with how the DOJ views threats and witness tampering. Stone's crimes are exactly the kind of offenses that strike at the heart of the justice system. Blocking investigations, lying under oath, and threatening witnesses are all mob-like tactics meant to subvert justice rather than advance the truth. And when it comes to threatening witnesses with violence, DOJ usually recommends harsher sentences, regardless of whether the victim feels like the threat is credible or not, especially under circumstances where the defendant doesn't want to plead out for a lighter sentence and forces the government to go through the trial. And as many advocates of criminal justice reform have pointed out, federal sentences can be very harsh, sometimes draconian, and it would be great if there was across-the-board reform to maybe tweak some of those sentences and maybe ratchet down some of the sentencing guidelines. It just seems really bad when the only people who get that kind of reduction in sentences are friends of the president. So, back to the story at hand. One day and one presidential tweet later, an amended and supplemental memorandum was shockingly submitted by the Justice Department. This just doesn't happen. The new memorandum makes only a passing mention to the government's previous recommendation in the case, which was filed less than 24 hours earlier. The new filing only says that its prior sentence recommendation, quote, does not accurately reflect the Department of Justice's position on what would be a reasonable sentence in this matter. In the new amended memorandum, the government declined to make a specific recommendation beyond saying that incarceration was appropriate. The sentencing length, the new memo reads, should be left to the judge's discretion. The government defers to the court as to what specific sentence is appropriate under the facts and circumstances of this case. The filing was signed by John Crabb Jr., the acting chief of the criminal division in the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, who entered in his appearance in the case minutes before the memo was filed. In justifying the DOJ's newfound position, the memorandum states that although Stone allegedly had threatened witness Credico's therapy dog, Bianca, saying that he was, quote, going to take that dog away from you, it was important to recognize that Credico, a New York radio host, has acknowledged that he, quote, never in any way felt that Stone himself posed a direct physical threat to me or my dog. Essentially what this comes down to is that the revised memorandum argues that there was never really any threat of physical violence. As a result, the previous memorandum is supposedly misguided and, quote, if the court were not to apply the 8-level enhancement for threatening a witness with physical injury, history, it would result in the defendant receiving an advisory guideline range of 37 to 46 months, which is more in line with the typical sentences imposed in obstruction cases, end quote. It goes on to urge the judge to consider Stone's advanced age, health, personal circumstances, and lack of criminal history in fashioning an appropriate sentence. And it's true that both sentencing recommendations could in fact be reasonable. The DOJ did not have to move for the enhancement based on the witness threatening, but by the same token, it was totally reasonable for them to move forward with that enhancement based on the threatening. The fact that reasonable minds can disagree about the original sentence highlights the fact that it's probably political intervention seeking a less harsh sentence for a compatriot of the president. And the results speak for themselves and highlight how unusual this was. The revised memorandum led to the shocking withdrawal of 4 career U.S. attorneys, with one outright resigning from his job. This led to backlash from within Congress, especially from members of the House Intelligence Committee, who Stone lied to. Representative Adam Schiff, the California Democrat who was the lead prosecutor in Trump's impeachment trial, said that, quote, if reports are correct, the Department of Justice and Attorney General Bill Barr are poised to overrule career prosecutors who made a sentencing recommendation yesterday, following a midnight tweet from the president attacking the proposed length of the sentence. Barr, of course, defends his position and argued it was, quote, preposterous to characterize his role in the Stone sentencing recommendation as an intervention. He argued that he was simply attempting to resolve an internal department dispute. This, of course, is poppycock, because any internal DOJ dispute about the Stone sentencing would have been settled before the first memo was filed. In other words, DOJ lawyers are supposed to be consummate professionals. Filing a memo on Monday and backtracking 24 hours later is amateur hour that you really don't see from the Department of Justice. And this is not the first time that President Trump's DOJ has pulled the rug out from its own attorneys in front of a federal judge. If you recall, last year, in the midst of the battle over adding a citizenship question to the 2020 census, the Justice Department tried to withdraw and replace its legal team with no explanation. The DOJ filed motions in 2 courts seeking to remove its own lawyers from the cases. 2 federal judges denied the DOJ's motions. And the inference was clear. There was significant turmoil amongst the attorneys at the Justice Department who didn't want to lie to federal judges about whether they could or could not include a citizenship question in the census. And so now all of the attention is on these 4 line prosecutors who are career attorneys for the government. Even President Trump, for that matter, tweeted, "Who are the 4 prosecutors? Mueller people who cut and ran after being exposed for recommending a ridiculous 9-year prison sentence to a man that got caught up in an investigation that was illegal, the Mueller scam, and shouldn't ever even have started. 13 angry Democrats, question mark?" Well, let's answer that question. These 4 people are a group of Ivy League educated prosecutors with some noteworthy bullet points on their curriculum vitae. Reports are that these 4 prosecutors have no history of political contributions in the last 10 years. My contacts at the DOJ say that all of these people were extremely well liked and hyper competent. So the situation at the Department of Justice can only be described as dire. Career prosecutors are being overruled by Attorney General Barr with little to no explanation and what appears to be overtly political reasons on the face of it. The President of the United States is attacking the DOJ lawyers during his nightly Twitter time, and judges are criticizing the government's position. And now AG Barr has admitted to bringing in a team of Midwestern lawyers to review and reverse determinations made by DOJ prosecutors on national security cases that may implicate the president. As David Loffman, a former senior Justice Department official, said, the move was, quote, a shocking, crammed-down political intervention in the criminal justice process. We are now truly at a break glass in case of fire moment for the Justice Department. Of course, there are those on the president's defense arguing that this is just a plot by prosecutors linked to the Mueller probe to legitimize their now defunct Russian election interference investigation. But with hints at a potential pardon and congratulatory tweets coming from the president, stating, "Congratulations to Attorney General Bill Barr for taking charge of a case that was totally out of control and perhaps should not have even been brought. Evidence now clearly shows that the Mueller scam was improperly brought and tainted. Even Bob Mueller lied to Congress." Even the president's own allies and those close to the situation are asking the president to show a little restraint. Attorney General Barr is going to testify in front of Congress at the end of March, but he appeared on ABC for an interview saying,
"I cannot do my job here at the department with a constant background commentary that undercuts me. To have public statements and tweets made about the department, about our people in the department, our men and women here, about cases pending in the department, and about judges before whom we have cases make it impossible for me to do my job and to assure the courts and the prosecutors in the department that we're doing our work with integrity.
Barr suggested that the president wasn't involved and that he made the decision on his own, but that ignores the fact that this action clearly benefits the president and is what the president wants, so that really doesn't clear the air in any meaningful way. And some have lauded Bill Barr for breaking with the president and suggesting that the Department of Justice is independent, but based on the president's reaction or non-reaction saying that Bill Barr can do whatever he wants, I think this is more likely just political theater. As commentator Quinta Jurecic put it, this is kayfabe. In other words, what they do in professional wrestling, where they appear to have fights when they're really just all friends at the end. It appears to be political subterfuge. And President Trump ostensibly backs this up by tweeting in the alternative that he hasn't interfered, but that he has the right to do so, which is worrying. He tweets, "The president has never asked me to do anything in a criminal case. This doesn't mean that I do not have, as president, the legal right to do so. I do, but I have so far chosen not to." Of course, none of this is happening in a vacuum. All of these shenanigans are going on less than a week after Trump was acquitted by the Senate on impeachment charges. In that short time, the administration has dismissed former National Security Advisor Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman and former U.S. Ambassador to the European Union Gordon Sondland, both of whom testified before the House Intelligence Committee's impeachment hearings. At the same time, Jessie Liu, the ex-U.S. attorney that oversaw the original Roger Stone case, has resigned from the Trump administration after the Trump administration removed her nomination for a top job at the Treasury Department. And if we're looking for historical precedent, there's one that jumps out. This whole situation is reminiscent of the infamous Saturday Night Massacre, when then-President Nixon ordered his Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General to fire Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox during the whole Watergate scandal. They resigned, and the reluctant Solicitor General Robert Bork ultimately handled Nixon's request. Is Bill Barr Trump's Robert Bork? Some would say yes, but AG Barr seems anything but reluctant to comply with Trump's demands. Here on this channel, we try to have fun with the law and the news, and we also try to be fair and balanced about the events as they unfold. But I can't really sugarcoat this situation. Things are very bad here in Washington. Even people who have worked with Barr are sounding the alarm. Former Deputy AG Donald Ayer served in the administration of George H.W. Bush and has known Barr for over 40 years and said,
"I don't think he's fit for the office because I think what he's done is to undertake a campaign essentially to undermine the Department of Justice."
As of the time of this filming, over 2,000 former DOJ lawyers have called on Barr to step down. Of course, he's not going to, but condemnation from career justice employees shows the severity of this crisis. The former employees wrote that, quote, "A person should not be given special treatment in criminal prosecution because they are a close political ally of the president. Governments that use the enormous power of law enforcement to punish their enemies and reward their allies are not constitutional republics. They are autocracies." And it's not just former DOJ lawyers either. It's the judges as well. A National Association of Federal Judges, which includes over 1,000 federal judges, and there aren't that many federal judges, has called an emergency meeting to discuss political interference in criminal prosecutions. This isn't normal. Okay, quick update. The news never sleeps, and I am coming to you from VidCon London. I was going to release this video today, but Roger Stone was sentenced, so we know the outcome to what happened here. In this particular sentencing hearing, the judge excoriated the DOJ. She just went after them for basically engaging in political misconduct. She confirmed that the DOJ originally had the U.S. Attorney for the District of D.C. to confirm the sentence. They talked to Main Justice, and it was approved. And John Crabb, the acting U.S. Attorney here, confirmed that there was some sort of misunderstanding, though he wouldn't explain what that misunderstanding was. After that, after the judge excoriated the DOJ, the judge engaged in her own calculation, which a federal judge is wont to do. She accepted some of the enhancements and rejected others. She deviated slightly from the guidelines. The judges are not bound by the federal sentencing guidelines, and the kind of deviation that she engaged in is totally normal. So the end of the story is that Roger Stone got 3 years and 4 months in jail, 40 months in jail, and he will serve that time unless he is pardoned. So back to Devin of the past to explain the repercussions of this particular hearing and sentencing. So here's what we know for certain. Roger Stone is going to jail. Probably. But for the man who bragged about his Stone's rules and that it, quote, is better to be infamous than never to be famous at all, well, mission accomplished, sir. And second, he's going to be wearing an orange jumpsuit for the foreseeable future, though it's possible he might get a presidential pardon. And while Stone's suit game is usually on point, I doubt any of those penguin-esque suits are going to fit when he finally gets out of federal prison. So Roger, when you get out of prison and need to replace all your old suits, I can't recommend Indochino highly enough. Especially if you want a custom-built slim-cut suit. Your suits are looking a little bit baggy. All of my suits are now made by Indochino, including this awesome brown checked three-piece that I'm wearing right now. Because when you're talking about Roger Stone, you have to bring your A-game. See, the secret to a great suit is all about the fit, and I'm a reasonably athletic guy, and I can never buy suits off the rack because they simply never fit right. And plus, they're crazy expensive. If the shoulders fit, the waist is too small, it either doesn't fit right, or it costs an arm and a leg to get a tailor to fix it. But with Indochino, you can send in your measurements online using the link in the description, or you can go to one of their hundreds of stores across the country and have a stylist take your measurements personally. For myself, I made an appointment, I went to the store in person, and a stylist worked with me for over 90 minutes when I went in for the first time. My personal stylist took my measurements, and a couple of weeks later, I got the best fitting suit of my entire life. And the best part is, I can just reorder and reorder using those exact measurements and know that I'm going to get a great suit every single time. They're perfect right out of the box. Indochino will make you a fully custom suit tailored specifically for you for less than $400. And the best part is, they still use the best materials like Super 140's wool. In fact, Legaleagles can get any premium Indochino suit for just $359 if you use the link in the description. You can customize it exactly how you want and get it made specifically for your individual body and nobody else. I will never get an off-the-rack suit again, and once you try it, neither will you. Legaleagles can get any premium Indochino suit for just $359 when you use the promo code Legaleagle at checkout, or use the link in the description. So use the link below to get the best custom suit of your entire life. Do you agree with my analysis? Leave your objections in the comments, and check out this playlist over here for all of my other real law reviews where I talk about all of the legal issues that are in the news. So click on this link, and I'll see you in court.